January 27th, 1984. Shrine Auditorium, Los Angeles. A Pepsi commercial is being filmed. Michael Jackson stands on a staircase surrounded by fans. Pyrotechnics are rigged above. The music starts. The crowd cheers. Jackson descends the stairs, dancing. Then something goes wrong. A spark. A flame. His hair catches fire. For 7 seconds, he continues performing. He does not realize he is burning. When he finally feels it, he drops to the ground. Crew members rush in. They extinguish the flames. Jackson is taken to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. The burns cover his scalp. Second and third degree, he will require surgery. He will require pain management. And 48 hours later, a doctor writes a prescription. That prescription, according to multiple sources close to Jackson, marks the beginning of something that will follow him for the rest of his life. The question is not whether the accident caused pain. The question is whether the treatment created a dependency that Michael Jackson could never escape. The Pepsi commercial was supposed to be a triumph. It was part of a $5 million endorsement deal, the largest in history at that time. Jackson was at the peak of his career. Thriller had been released in November 1982. By January 1984, it was the best-selling album in the world. Jackson was not just famous, he was a phenomenon. And Pepsi wanted to capitalize on that. The commercial was being shot with elaborate production, hundreds of extras, professional dancers, pyrotechnic effects. It was designed to look like a concert. Jackson would perform a modified version of Billie Jean while descending a staircase surrounded by fans holding sparklers. The shoot was scheduled to take multiple takes. Everything had been rehearsed, but pyrotechnics are unpredictable, and on the sixth take, something went wrong. The magnesium flash bomb that was supposed to create a visual effect behind Jackson ignited too close to his head. Witnesses later said the explosion was louder than expected. The flash was brighter, and Jackson's hair, which had been heavily treated with styling products, caught fire immediately. For 7 seconds, he continued dancing. He did not stop. Some witnesses believed he thought the heat was from the stage lights. Others believed he was so focused on the performance that he did not register what was happening. But the footage, which was later obtained by news outlets, shows the moment clearly. Flames visible on his scalp, smoke rising, and Jackson still moving, still performing, until the pain became undeniable. He collapsed, the crew extinguished the fire, and he was rushed to Cedars-Sinai. The burns were severe. A portion of his scalp, roughly the size of a palm, was burned down to the tissue. Second-degree burns covered a larger area. Third-degree burns, which destroy all layers of skin, affected the center. Jackson was conscious when he arrived at the hospital. He was in pain, significant pain, but he was also concerned about something else, his image. He asked the doctors not to shave his head. He asked them to do whatever they could to preserve his hair. Even in the emergency room, even while burned, he was thinking about how he would look. That is the level of control he maintained over his public persona, and it is also the beginning of a pattern, the prioritization of appearance over health, the willingness to endure pain rather than show vulnerability. Dr. Stephen Hufflin, a plastic surgeon, was called in. Hufflin was known for working with celebrities. He had a reputation for discretion and skill. He examined the burns and determined that Jackson would need surgery. The damaged tissue would need to be removed. A skin graft might be required, and in the meantime, Jackson would need pain management, severe pain management. Because burns of that degree do not heal quickly, they require weeks, sometimes months of treatment. And during that time, the pain is constant, throbbing, burning, inescapable. 48 hours after the accident, Jackson was given his first prescription for painkillers. The exact medication is disputed. Some reports suggest it was Percocet, a combination of oxycodone and acetaminophen. Others suggest it was Demerol, a synthetic opioid commonly used for severe pain. What is not disputed is that the medication was strong and that it was effective. Jackson, who had never taken prescription painkillers before, experienced immediate relief. The pain dulled. His body relaxed. And for the first time since the accident, he felt something close to normal. That relief was seductive. Because pain, once you have experienced it at that level, becomes a reference point. Every moment without pain feels like a gift, and the medication that provides that gift becomes essential. Jackson's burn injuries required multiple surgeries over the following months. Each surgery brought new pain, each recovery period required more medication, and each prescription extended the period during which Jackson was dependent on opioids to function. His doctors, according to later testimony, were cautious. They monitored his dosage. They tried to taper him off as the burns healed. But Jackson resisted. He told them the pain was still unbearable, that he could not sleep, that he could not work. And in the world Jackson inhabited, not working was not an option. He had tours scheduled, recording sessions booked, appearances planned. The machinery of his career did not stop because he was injured. It adjusted. And part of that adjustment was ensuring that Jackson could perform despite the pain. By mid-1984, the burn had healed enough for Jackson to return to public life. But the medication had not stopped. Jackson, according to those close to him, continued taking painkillers. Not because the burn still hurt, but because stopping hurt more. Opioid withdrawal is brutal. It causes muscle aches, nausea, anxiety, insomnia, sweating, and intense cravings. For someone who had been on opioids for months, stopping cold was not realistic. It required medical supervision, a gradual taper, psychological support. But Jackson did not seek that support. He was too busy, too famous, too concerned with maintaining the illusion that everything was fine. And so he continued taking the pills. Not at the same dosage, but enough to avoid withdrawal, enough to function. The problem with opioids is that tolerance builds quickly. The same dose that provided relief in February 1984 no longer worked by June. Jackson needed more, and his doctors, whether out of concern or complicity, provided more. Some reports suggest that Jackson began seeing multiple doctors, that he would get prescriptions from different physicians to avoid raising red flags. This practice, known as doctor shopping, is common among people with prescription drug dependencies. It allows them to obtain more medication than any single doctor would prescribe, and it makes it difficult for any one physician to see the full picture of what is being consumed. The Pepsi accident was not the only source of pain in Jackson's life. By the mid-1980s, he was also dealing with other physical issues. He had vitiligo, a skin condition that causes loss of pigmentation. He had lupus, an autoimmune disease that causes chronic pain and fatigue. He had undergone multiple cosmetic surgeries, each of which required recovery and pain management. And he was performing at a level that placed immense strain on his body. Dancing for hours, rehearsing relentlessly, traveling constantly, his body was breaking down. And the medication that had started as a treatment for a burn became a treatment for everything. For physical pain, for emotional pain, for the exhaustion of being Michael Jackson. Friends and family members noticed changes. Jackson became more withdrawn. He was less present in conversations. He would nod off during meetings. His weight fluctuated. His skin, already pale from vitiligo, took on a sallow tone. He was irritable, defensive when questioned about his health. Katherine Jackson, his mother, confronted him on multiple occasions. She asked him if he was taking too much medication. He denied it. He told her the doctors knew what they were doing, that he needed the medication to manage his pain, and in a sense, he was right. He did have pain, chronic, unrelenting pain. But the medication was no longer managing it. It was masking it. And in the process, it was creating new problems. By the early 1990s, Jackson's dependency was an open secret within his inner circle. His security team knew, his managers knew, his doctors knew, but no one intervened. Or rather, no one intervened successfully. There were attempts. In 1993, Elizabeth Taylor convinced Jackson to enter a rehabilitation facility in London. He stayed for several weeks. He completed the program. He returned to the United States claiming to be clean. But within months, he was using again. Because the underlying issues had not been addressed, the pain was still there, the pressure was still there, the isolation was still there, and the medication was still the easiest way to cope. The 1993 allegations changed everything. Not because they were true or false, but because they added a new layer of stress. a new source of pain. Jackson was being accused of something unthinkable. His reputation was being destroyed. The media was relentless. And in the midst of that crisis, he turned to the one thing that had always provided relief: medication. According to reports, his use escalated dramatically during this period. He was not just taking pills, he was taking them in quantities that alarmed even the doctors who prescribed them. And some of those doctors began to refuse, which led Jackson to find new doctors, doctors who were willing to prescribe without asking too many questions. The pattern continued for years. Tours were postponed because Jackson could not perform. Rehearsals were canceled because he could not get out of bed. Interventions were staged, promises were made, and then broken. Jackson's dependency was no longer just about pain management. It was about survival. He could not imagine life without the medication. He had been on it for so long that he did not remember what it felt like to exist without it. The medication had become his baseline, and anything less felt like suffering. In 2001, Jackson released the album Invincible. The promotional tour for the album was scaled back because of his health. In 2005, during his criminal trial, he appeared in court looking frail. His movements were slow. His speech was slurred on some days, clear on others. The inconsistency suggested that his medication use was erratic, that he was taking too much on some days and trying to cut back on others. The trial ended in acquittal, but Jackson was destroyed, financially, physically, emotionally, and the medication, which had once been a solution, was now part of the problem. By 2009, Jackson's dependency had evolved into something more dangerous. He was no longer just taking pills. He was using propofol, a surgical anesthetic, to sleep. Propofol is not a painkiller. It is a sedative used in operating rooms. It induces unconsciousness within seconds. And it requires constant monitoring because it suppresses breathing. Using it outside a medical setting is reckless. Using it to sleep is suicidal, but Jackson, according to Dr. Conrad Murray, insisted on it. He called it his milk. He said it was the only thing that allowed him to rest, and Murray, whether out of desperation or greed, agreed to administer it. The use of propofol was the final stage of a dependency that had started 25 years earlier. It was the logical, tragic conclusion of a pattern that began with a prescription written 48 hours after a burn injury. That first prescription was medically justified. It was appropriate, it was necessary, but it opened a door that Jackson never managed to close. Because opioids do not just relieve pain, they create a relationship, a dependency, a need that grows over time. And once that need is established, it is nearly impossible to break without significant support. Support that Jackson, for all his wealth and fame, never received. On June 25, 2009, Michael Jackson died. The cause was acute propofol intoxication, but the root cause was deeper. It was a dependency that started in 1984. A dependency that was managed, mismanaged, enabled, and ignored for 2.5 decades. Jackson's death was not an accident. It was the result of years of decisions. Decisions made by doctors, by managers, by Jackson himself. Decisions that prioritized short-term relief over long-term health. Decisions that treated symptoms instead of causes. Decisions that allowed a man in chronic pain to spiral into a dependency that ultimately killed him. The question is not whether the Pepsi accident caused Jackson's death. It did not, but it set in motion a series of events that made his death more likely. It introduced him to a class of drugs that he would never stop using. It created a pattern of pain and relief, crisis and medication that would define the rest of his life. And it revealed a larger truth about fame, about medicine, and about the way society treats people in chronic pain. We expect them to suffer in silence. We expect them to keep performing. We expect them to manage. And when they cannot, we offer them pills. And then we blame them when the pills become the problem. The prescription written 48 hours after the Pepsi accident was not inherently wrong. It was a response to legitimate pain. But it was also the first step in a process that no one fully understood at the time. In 1984, the opioid crisis had not yet begun. Doctors were taught that opioids were safe when used for pain management. Pharmaceutical companies promoted them aggressively. Patients were told they had a right to be pain-free, and so prescriptions were written liberally, without adequate warnings, without sufficient monitoring, without consideration for the long-term consequences. Michael Jackson was not unique in developing a dependency. Millions of people have followed the same path: an injury, a prescription, relief, tolerance, increased dosage, dependency. The difference is that Jackson had access. He had money. He had doctors willing to prescribe whatever he asked for. He had the resources to sustain his dependency for decades. Most people do not. Most people hit a wall. They run out of prescriptions. They run out of money. They turn to illegal alternatives. Or they die. Jackson had the privilege of prolonging his dependency, but privilege in this case was not a blessing. It was a curse, because it allowed him to avoid the consequences long enough to believe he was in control. Until he was not. The story of the Pepsi accident is often told as a moment of bad luck, a freak accident, a tragedy, and it was all of those things, but it was also a turning point. A moment when Michael Jackson's relationship with pain and medication began. A moment that, in hindsight, explains so much of what came after. The erratic behavior, the physical decline, the isolation, the desperation. All of it traces back to that prescription, to the relief it provided, and to the dependency it created. If there is a lesson in this story, it is not about Michael Jackson specifically. It is about the way we treat pain, about the way we prescribe medication, about the way we expect people to function despite suffering. Michael Jackson was in pain for most of his adult life. Physical pain from injuries and illness, emotional pain from trauma and pressure. And instead of addressing the root causes, the medical system gave him pills. And when the pills stopped working, they gave him more pills. And when the pills created new problems, they gave him different pills. Until finally, they gave him something so dangerous that it killed him. The prescription written in January 1984 was not a death sentence, but it was the first step on a path that led to one. And understanding that path, understanding how a single medical decision can ripple forward across decades, is essential. Because Michael Jackson is not the only person this has happened to. He is just the most famous, the most visible, the most tragic example of what happens when pain is treated with medication instead of care, when dependency is enabled instead of addressed, when the people around someone in crisis prioritize performance over health. Michael Jackson's death in 2009 was ruled a homicide. Dr. Conrad Murray was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter. He served 2 years in prison. But Murray was not the only person responsible. He was the last person in a long line of doctors, managers, family members, and friends who failed to intervene, who failed to say no, who failed to prioritize Michael Jackson's life over his career. The system that killed Jackson was not created by one person. It was created by many, and it started with a prescription written 48 hours after a burn injury. If you made it this far, you understand something important. That addiction is not a moral failure. It is a medical condition. And that dependency does not start with a choice to get high. It starts with a choice to stop hurting. Michael Jackson made that choice in January 1984, and he spent the rest of his life paying for it. Not because he was weak, but because the support he needed was never there, because the system that was supposed to help him failed, and because in the end, the medication that was meant to heal him destroyed him. Drop a comment, share your thoughts, and if this made you see prescription drug dependency differently, pass it along. Because stories like this matter. They remind us that behind every statistic is a person, and that every dependency starts somewhere, often with something as simple as a prescription.